Whether it's in your title or not, you are probably managing projects, not just people. And project management is complicated stuff. Today's guest is here to help us learn how to manage projects with confidence and avoid unnecessary missteps. By the end of this conversation, you'll have a new framework for understanding projects and how to achieve collective goals. Today's guest is James Louttit. James is the author of Leading Impactful Teams, Achieving Low-Stress Success in Project Management, a practical guide to building high-performing teams without burnout. As a leadership coach and former CIO, he now trains and advises project managers and business leaders around the world, blending real-world experience with powerful facilitation and team-building techniques. His mission is to help managers lead with clarity, sustainability, and impact. I share new episodes and other tips for managers every week, so be sure to subscribe and click that bell so you never miss an episode. Now here's my conversation with James. Thank you so much for joining me today, James. I'm really excited to talk about project management. It's definitely one of the things that is not my forte. So I learned so much from reading your book, and I'm really excited to have you here to walk us through some of that today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, Mamie. I love talking about project management and all the human side of it.
Yes, that's the thing is I feel like there's maybe an unfair kind of set of thinking that's like we manage people and we manage projects, but really we're kind of always managing the people who are doing the work of the projects. And so I love the way that you kind of brought them together. So Can you maybe kick us off with one of the concepts that I found really helpful from your book, which is these various lenses by which we look at projects or work that we have to get done in terms of our goals. Can you just give us the high level on that?
Yeah, so I've managed a lot of projects over the years, and I was looking to simplify it down. And years ago, I came across a wonderful book by Edward de Bono called Six Thinking Hats. And I wanted to create something that was similar to that, a real simplification of the content for people. So I went around and I did all the reviews of all the other people who'd written stuff about project management. And for me, I boiled it down into what I call the 8 lenses of project management. 7 of which people are going to yawn a little bit and think, oh, I've heard of that before, but maybe I can give a different angle on those. And one of which is the biggest one that people get wrong and causes so much stress and frustration in projects. So the 8 lenses are scope, time, cost, quality, your team, your stakeholders, risk and its big and little brothers, assumptions, dependencies, and issues. And that's the sort of 7 core that you would see in most kind of project management type books. The one that people miss over and over again is prioritization. Trying to figure out what we do and, more importantly, what we don't do and how we make those decisions. I think that's a really interesting angle that perhaps people find useful.
Yeah, well, I feel like maybe we should jump in there first since it's the juiciest, because prioritization is a challenge across pretty much every manager I ever talked to. It has too much to do and not enough time to do it. And prioritization is such a struggle. So maybe we can start with that. And why is it so important when you're managing a project to be able to prioritize? I mean, isn't that what the whole plan is supposed to be doing for you, is figuring out what you're going to do in what order?
Yeah. So back in 2016, I was managing a big program with a big bank, and I ended up in hospital because I wasn't doing prioritization well enough. And I was trying to fix everything, do everything, drive everything forward myself. And it broke me. It ended up being a very extreme experience, which is what I talk about in the introduction to my book. And when I was lying in the hospital bed back in 2016, my brother, he's kind of cool. He's got a big beard and long hair, and he plays the guitar and he makes harps for a living. And he sent me a video of him playing the bare necessities from the Jungle Book, Baloo the bear. And in there's a line that says, when you pick a pawpaw or a prickly pear, if you prick a raw paw, well, next time, beware. Don't pick the prickly pear with a paw. When you pick a pear, try to use a claw. But you don't need to use a claw when you pick a pear with a big pawpaw. And I stopped there. My wife's told me I'm not allowed to sing any further than that. So what he's talking about there is prioritization, right? Value and effort prioritization. And the ability to choose pawpaws, big, juicy, yummy things. That's your papaya. Big, juicy, yummy thing with loads of value in it. You just pick off the tree and eat it. Versus a prickly pear, much smaller, much spikier, much less value in it, much harder, and it hurts. And for me, bringing those two angles on prioritization is what makes a huge difference to the success of people's projects and their careers. If you can show people the value of what you're doing with each of your either projects or tasks or programs, if you're operating at very senior levels, and the effort that each one's going to take, and use those to drive good decisions and good discussions, actually that unlocks a lot less stress in the environment in most places that I work with.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much because I think there's a strain that we have around prioritization that feels like the entire framework is what's most important.
Yes.
But we don't always define what's important is. Or we have a set of criteria that are related to the goal, but maybe not necessarily pulling up to the two factors that you just talked about, which is what's the value creation and then what's the effort to create that value. And if we choose things that are lower effort and higher value, that might actually get us a lot farther than if we do a bunch of things that seem important, but are actually really hard to do and aren't going to deliver a good amount of value, aren't going to give us that ROI. What a different way to think about prioritization.
It's really funny. I see three types of work and three types of project management. So there's proactive, so reactive, proactive, and planned are the types of work. And the three types of project management are just do it, Agile and Waterfall. And they tie back and forth to each other. And unfortunately, if you don't do prioritization and if you don't actually have these conversations and show people the decisions that need to be made, the trade-offs that need to be made in a project, you end up with this JFDI project management, just flip and do it. And all the pressure ends up on the PM and on their team. And if you can use one of the other approaches or part of one of the other approaches to get better decisions made in your governance structures, wherever that is, then actually the pressure sits where it should sit, which is in the decision makers. This is option A, this is option B, this is option C, and doing nothing is option D. Which one would you like to choose? And we all move forward. And I think sometimes people feel like they can throw something into a project or onto a person or a team and just get it done with sheer effort and energy. And unfortunately, that's where people end up stressed and in hospital, like me back in 2016.
Yeah. There's a lot of that throwing things over the transom that happens in the workplace, for sure. All right, you just used two different terms around project management style. So obviously the just get it done, we all know what that feels like. But you said Agile and Waterfall.
Yeah.
Can you maybe just give us a little definition of the two of those for whom those terms are new?
Yeah. So for me, like this is kind of comes from the software industry, this world of Agile, and they talk about Waterfall. Like Waterfall is your traditional, what you would think of as project management, right? You've got a plan, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this all the way through. And it's like a Gantt chart, which is like what you imagine when you see a project plan with lines on it and telling you when things are going to happen. Everything planned out as well as you can. And there's lots of mistakes that people make when they're doing those plans. And it works really, really well for something like building a house, right? Or building a building where we kind of done it before. Things aren't going to change very much on us as we go. The people who are doing it are experts in what they do. The technology is not changing very much as we go. We know how to do it, right? So that's something that you would see if you're doing like a construction project. Unfortunately, most of our projects don't work like that, right? Because very often the team are learning or people are going to change their minds on us. Like the world is going to change. Someone's going to change the environment that we're operating on. All of that kind of stuff happens to it. And in that context, you do a thing called Agile, right? Which is basically the fundamental boil it down to is a to-do list, right? With the highest value, lowest effort thing at the top. And then you just work down your to-do list. And there's other ways to put around it, but you've got Kanban and Scrum. There's different brands and slight different tweaks to the way it works. But the idea is that you're looking at it every week and deciding what the most important thing to do and not worrying what you thought the most important thing was going to be in October back in January when you planned the thing.
Mm-hmm. It sounds much more dynamic. And even that to-do list sounds like it can be evolving. So things that you put on it might come off and new things might get added, because it's not based on what you planned before. It's based on what's important right now.
That's right. It's the difference between thinking you can predict the future with everything that's going to happen versus trusting your future selves to make decisions about what should be done as you go along.
I love this. Let's trust our future selves. Okay. So I want to go back to these different lenses because this all sounds amazing, both in terms of thinking about how we prioritize, doing dynamic prioritization with an evolving to-do list on a project. But then we have something called stakeholders, you mentioned, which feel like a lot of stakeholders don't always like that. They don't know. They kind of want to know what's happening on what timeline. So can you talk a little bit about this lens of stakeholders and how do you incorporate that into project management?
Yeah. So actually, without putting too much of a spoiler on the book, right, I come to 3 conclusions at the end of the book. A lot of what people miss when they're managing any kind of project is one of 3 things: prioritization, which we've talked about, transparency, and humanity. And the transparency piece is massive for stakeholders because they want to see when we think things are going to happen and they want to be involved in the decisions that change that. And I think a lot of us take a lot of that stuff ourselves into maybe even internally or within our teams and make all those decisions locally. And the stakeholders are kind of left on the outside and they're not involved in those decisions. They don't see what's going on. And therefore, when it doesn't turn out to be exactly what they expected it to be, they get grumpy. Whereas I like to bring the stakeholders into the decisions. So when my wife and I got married, we agreed that I'm in charge of everything. All of the things I'm in charge of, apart from decisions. Obviously, she makes the decisions and everything else I'm in charge of. And actually, when you're managing a project, that's quite a useful way to think about it, right? You're in charge of everything. You have to make sure all the things happen, but get the stakeholders to make the decisions. Because once they're making decisions, they'll be on your side and they'll help you be successful, as opposed to being on the outside throwing rocks at whatever decisions you've made.
All right, let's make this really real in the workplace. So who are some of the different kinds of stakeholders and how do we engage them to create that level of transparency and bring them in and give them the right information so they can make the right decisions? And, because I think that's another place where it gets a little sticky is they're sometimes very distant from the work. And so the decisions they make don't feel like the quote right decisions to the people who are actually doing the work. So maybe just unpack this a little bit more and give us some examples or stories.
Yeah, so let's talk about like your wide group of stakeholders. So let's say you've got maybe senior people who are making decisions and involved in governance and things like that, but you've also got a wider tail of all the people who can be impacted by your project. When I joined CPL as the CIO back in, when was it, 2019, I kind of had this huge group of people, 1,300 people across the organization that I wanted to, get ideas from and engage with. And how do you listen to that number of people? Well, the traditional thing is you send out a survey, right? And everyone gets the survey and I've got work to do now in a survey. So they fill in the survey, maybe, right? Some of them might. And they do it a bit half-hearted and they're doing it at 7 o'clock in the evening just before they fly out the door because they're late home anyway. And you get some things back. I think there's better ways to do this, right? By putting in your own effort. So what I did is I traveled around. We had, I think, a dozen different offices around the country. And I went to each of the offices and I introduced myself into literally into the kind of the office area. I was like, hi, I got the office manager to introduce me. Hi, I'm James. I'm the new CIO. And I just want to hear what you're thinking. And I had some Post-it notes. So I had green ones and pink ones. You can't get red Post-it notes for some reason, but I had green ones and pink ones. And I gave everybody a green Post-it note and a pink one. And I said, what is one thing you like about the IT function and what we're doing? And what is one thing you would change about the IT function and what we're doing? Right. And I gave everyone a minute to just write those down. Silence, no talking, right? Just write down your things. And then I gathered them all back up again. So it took a decent amount of effort to go around and listen, and people could see that effort because I'd gone to them. And then what I did is I took all those Post-it notes, turned them into a word cloud and started talking about them in the newsletter. I took the word cloud to the board. I showed people what I'd learned from the organization. And people started to realize that what I was doing in the IT function and what we were doing in the IT function was responding to what they told us on that 1 minute of a Post-it note filling in, right? So I think the only way to influence people is to put yourself in their shoes. You have to understand the world from their position. And to do that, you have to listen. right? And active listening, going out in kind of creative ways and making it easy for people to engage with you, I think is something that often, because we're stressed and because we're busy, we miss out on. So something like that with the pink Post-it notes and the green Post-it notes is quite a nice little tip for people to take away.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I thought of was going back to this idea of prioritization and effort versus impact, and how sending a survey is super low effort and seems really obvious to do, but the impact is also pretty low. Like, you're not going to get that many people responding, and
Possibly
you may or may not
negative.
get the best. Right. So instead of doing the kind of obvious low effort, but reality low impact, you went for a high effort that gave you a high impact. And that is just so cool, and something that I think we can run past sometimes because it feels like a lot of work, but it's actually much better ROI. So that's very cool. And then, going back to stakeholders here, we've got the senior folks or board level, and then everyone who's impacted by your work. And then that's a really important stakeholder group that's really easy to overlook, whether it be our customers, our internal customers, our colleagues in other departments who we need to collaborate with who might be impacted. Like, that's just a really important thing to remember as we're moving, that we should be thinking kind of holistically about those various stakeholders and what information do they need, but also what information do we need from them.
Yeah. Yeah. And fundamentally, that piece of going and listening creates relationships. And relationships are where a lot of this works. And if you don't have those relationships in play, then a lot of the whatever kind of structure you're putting, whether you're Agile, Waterfall, all that doesn't really matter, right? Because people aren't going to like you and do your thing. And the way to actually, one of the interesting things that I often get is, how do I get people to buy into my thing? James, come and tell me, how do I get people to do my thing? The answer is, don't do your thing, do our thing. Find out what the other person wants, listen to them, give them a chance to input into it, give them a chance to raise the risks or whatever that could go wrong. And all of a sudden, it's not you against me, it's you and me against the problem. And that's better.
Yes. All right. Well, you just mentioned risk, so I feel like maybe we should go to that lens next.
Yeah.
How do we tackle risks? Because this is, again, another place where it feels like it's really hard to figure out what the actual risks are. Sometimes we can't control them. Sometimes we can. So what's your take on how we approach risks in our projects?
Yeah. So risk management is one of the most important things. And almost everybody gets it so blindingly wrong. It's actually distressing. It distresses me how much. So there's a normal risk management approach, which people talk about. You go and identify your risk and then you mitigate your risk or you accept it, whatever, right? Whatever the PMP says about that. And that's fine, right? There's some value in that. For me, I like to go proactively to everybody and not just ask them to fill in the risk log. I actually sit and I give them some time, silent writing, to actually say, guys, what could go wrong? Write it down on a Post-it note, but I'm not going to talk, and I don't want you to talk. In our meeting, we've got 5 minutes. Get these ideas down on a piece of paper. Once you have them, they're on a Post-it note. They're safe, and there's something you can do about it. They go then into the risk log, and that's fine. And maybe you're going to mitigate some of them, and that's just the normal risk management. The thing that I think most people miss, though, with risk management is that stuff might still go wrong, right? There's stuff, even after you've mitigated a risk, there's stuff that still could go wrong. And that is where there's a word that a lot of people hate at senior levels, and a lot of people aren't allowed to use at junior levels, which is contingency. And the reason they're not allowed to do it is because they don't justify it. So if you go to someone and say, we've got a project and it's going to cost us $1 million, but we need 20% contingency, and the boss says, no, or why do you need 20% contingency? And you come up with something like, I don't know, industry standard. It's like a standard in the industry that we always had like 20%. And you just give this kind of half justification of something that's nothing at all. Your boss will take out the contingency and it's gone, right? Whereas if you go to them and say, it's not we need 20% contingency, it's not a percentage, it's we need 104,000 euros because if this thing goes wrong, we're going to have to buy another thing, right? And that's going to cost us 104,000 euros, right? And you just put it there on the side. This thing goes wrong, 104,000 euros or dollars. And you put that into your steering pack. And then the boss can say, okay, well, how do we make sure that thing doesn't go wrong? Because they can now see the consequence of the thing going wrong. And now, again, it's you and me against the problem, right? The steering committee are helping you to avoid the thing from going wrong and avoid spending the 104,000 euros or dollars, right? So this is it's a bit of a mindset shift. And almost all the companies, before I start working with them, are doing this kind of, either they're adding 20% contingency and having a big fight about it, it's all grumpy, or they're hiding contingency in their estimates, which is bad as well. And that makes you look really inefficient. But by bringing it out and tying it to a risk, and you can get your risks from your team, you can use AI to identify risks and what could go wrong. There's lots of different ways of identifying risks. And then you tell the story of what could go wrong, and you're getting people on your side.
Yes. And I think when we talk about contingencies, right, some of it is going to be financial. Some of it could be in timing. Some of it could be in additional people, right? There are a bunch of different possible outcomes of a risk that, unfortunately comes to fruition. But identifying those things up front makes so much sense. Both, and as you said, getting your stakeholders behind them, because then they can help avoid them and you don't have to hide the risks, right? You don't have to show up and say, oh, bad news, this thing went wrong. We had no plan for it. We didn't think about it, right? Which nobody wants to say that to their boss.
Yeah.
So thinking through those and the implications makes a lot more sense up front. And even though you can't identify them all, coming in with some plan and showing that to whoever your sponsor is at least gives you a sense of, we've done the best we could. Sure, something else might come up and we'll tackle it when we get there, but it's not that we're going in blindly.
Yeah, but I do think we could identify a lot more than we do in a lot of cases. Right? Asking your team, using a silent writing technique to identify what they think could go wrong and getting those captured, and asking an AI to give you some suggestions as well and show those things. The other thing that this does is amazing is it lets you sleep. Because all of a sudden, your boss's boss, who sits on your steering committee, is now responsible for making sure that this, bad thing doesn't go wrong, as well as you. And this is how you take some of the stress and pressure off you and put it where it should be, in the decision makers and the governance, structure that sits around you.
Okay, one more question about risk here, which is, obviously, not all risks are created equal, both in terms of the impact that it's going to have, right? What kind of contingency you need available, but also in terms of their likelihood of happening. Yeah. So do you do any kind of prioritization amongst the risks to figure out which ones are worth our attention and which ones should we just kind of have on this list that in the back of our minds we know might be a problem, but we don't need to really worry about until it becomes a problem?
Yeah. So quite a brutal prioritization is I pick 3. I believe senior people can only understand 3 things in a meeting. So I don't go in, I might have a risk log with a number of other things on, but I'm only going to be talking about the actual big things that I need help with. And so focusing effort and understanding and resources on the big ones that could go wrong and are likely to go wrong, and if they do go wrong will have a big impact, those ones, take them to the top, and keep the other ones, because they might change, they might become scarier and worse over time, but make sure you're being really careful, because if you tell someone about 20 things that might go wrong, they're going to ignore all of them. If you can tell them about one thing that's going to go wrong, and this is what happens if it goes wrong, then they might get on your side and help you to stop that thing from going wrong.
Cool. Okay. Makes perfect sense. All right. What is another lens that people struggle with when it comes to managing our projects and keeping everything moving in the right direction?
I think a lot of the stuff is around the people side. Let's talk about time and estimating things. How long is something going to take? Right. So often I run a training course and I teach people how to do this. And one of the biggest mistakes, so there's a couple of massive mistakes that people make when they're figuring out how long something's going to take. The first thing that they do is they're not clear of the difference between the work effort involved and the duration that the task is going to take. So the work effort is actually, while you're doing the thing, how many hours, we used to call them man hours or person hours of effort is involved in the thing. And that might be 8 hours, right? And the duration is the time from the start of the task to the end of the task. And they are different things. And a lot of people don't even realize that when you look at a plan and it's kind of like, they're kind of interchangeable. And you're like, what are you estimating, work or duration? Like a worky duration thing. Like, okay, well, which one? Let's just split them out and be really clear, because work can be done in lots of different ways, right? If you think about something like counting ballots after election, right? You've got a time frame that needs to happen. It needs to be quite quick. So what do? You've got 50 hours worth of work, all these ballots that need counting. So you get 50 people together in a big room and they all spend 1 hour counting ballots, right? You've done 50 hours work effort in 1 hour of duration. When my wife decides we want to paint the kitchen, which happens about once every 3 years, right? What I don't do, it also takes about 50 hours to do the piece of work. But what I don't do is get 50 people into my kitchen, give them all a paintbrush and go, ready, steady, go, 50 hours worth of painting, right? We don't do that. No, what we do is I start on the Friday night with some masking tape. Saturday, I do very little in the morning because we've got to pick the kids up and drop them off and move them around and do all the stuff like that. And then I'll get some stuff done at lunchtime. But then in the afternoon, it's England against Ireland in the rugby, and I'm going to watch that. So I'm going to stop the painting task and do that. And then we're out for dinner on Saturday evening, so I'm not going to do it then. And then Sunday, I might get a good go at doing some proper painting. But then it's the week, and I've got to go to work. So now I'm going to leave everything drying and whatever else, and come back to it the following weekend. And the same thing, 50 hours of work effort might take 2.5 weeks to do in duration. And I think breaking those two things out and understanding how much time and capacity each person has to work on each task is a huge part of the planning process that people often miss out on and often get very wrong.
Yeah, well, this was definitely one of the things that I struggled with and was completely game changer when I learned the difference between effort and duration. I used to make my project plans. You're going to totally laugh at me, but I was young and naive. And I would just say like, okay, here's the 20 things I have to do. So I'll do this on Monday and I'll do this on Tuesday. And then so-and-so will do this on Wednesday. And this will happen on Thursday. And I didn't think about either effort or duration. It was just like, put some dates on things and we'll call it done. And then I learned about effort and I was like, okay, cool. So now I need to plan these things. All right. So this is going to take me like 4 hours. Okay, cool. So I'll just do that on Monday, but it's going to take me 4 hours. And then this will take so-and-so so long, and kind of just planned it that way, but didn't account for duration at all. And so everything was always like stacked up right against each other, assuming we get everything done in a single day because that's the day it was assigned to. Yeah. And once I finally was like, oh, now I know how to build a project plan and we can actually hit our deadlines because we've been thoughtful about both the effort it's going to take and that someone is not going to sit and work on one thing for 7 hours in a row. And sometimes they have to write a draft that takes an hour and then they have to send it over to me and it's going to take me 6 hours before I open my email to see it. So then I need to spend 45 minutes reviewing it and then I'm going to send it back and they're not going to see the email for another 6 hours. And suddenly our work just smoothed out and we were able to, again, hit our deadlines and be just like more collaborative, I would guess. It's maybe the way to say it is like we could actually work together without feeling like there's this frenetic energy that we all have these deadlines that we have to hit.
And I think that's one of the interesting things. So what you're talking about is a thing called resource leveling, like deciding who's doing what when and trying to get them working a full day, but not more than that on every day. It's actually really hard to do. It's almost impossible on most projects to fill everybody's time with productive things up to like 8 hours. It's almost impossible. Like I've never seen it actually successfully done, which is why I like to have a mix of Agile and Waterfall approach happening next to each other. So what we actually have is some things that need to be planned out, this, then this, then this, then this, and some things which are just a to-do list. And you use the to-do list to backfill the gaps in and around the plan. Ooh. Right? So people can then know what they need to do when they have 3 hours because they're waiting for you to get on to open your email because you're in a meeting, right? So they know the next thing that they need to be doing. And all of a sudden, by just mixing these two different types of work and teaching people how to do that, you can actually have a vastly more efficient way of working and delivering projects.
Perfect place for us to wrap up here. So, James, can you tell us about a great manager you worked for and what made this person such a fabulous boss?
I was thinking about this. So back early in my career, We were running a big program. It was the buy one get one free stuff on a website, and we basically put a load of stuff in and it broke it. And there's a whole story in the book about butternut squash soup, which your listeners will quite enjoy. But the guy who was managing that project at the time was a chap called Matt, and Matt was probably my first proper manager. And what I saw him do in that situation, which was an incredibly stressful situation, because a lot of things went wrong, and a lot of them were mine and my team's fault, right? But what he did is he absorbed that. And he told us, he asked us, he had us working on things. We were working very hard on them. But I could see that he was dealing with that at the senior level and keeping and protecting us from the noise. We were junior people. We didn't really necessarily know the consequences of what we were doing. And I watched him own and manage that point, even though it wasn't actually his mistake. It was mine or my colleagues, right? He owned that and protected us from it. And that's something I always look back to. How, as a leader, can I protect my team and make sure that they get the credit when they've done amazing things, and that I am responsible and I'm accountable when things go wrong, and I'm owning that.
Oh, beautiful. And a good lesson for all of us.
Yeah.
And where can people learn more about you? Remind us the title of your book and where people can get a copy of it.
Yes. So the book is called Leading Impactful Teams, Achieving Low Stress Success in Project Management. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's my main kind of area. So it's Louttit is how you spell my surname. And we're actually just kicking off a thing called a school community. I don't know if people have heard of that yet, but there's an online community where we're actually going to deliver training and all kinds of good, useful stuff that people can do. But if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll be able to show you where that is and help you to find some of the content.
Fabulous. Well, thank you again so much. I love these conversations because I always learn so much because, as I said, project management is something I'm still working on. So I really appreciate you sharing with me today.
I know it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, Mamie.